Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for being here, no matter the rain and shine. This is the final Dumanian lecture of this year. And first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the Dumanian family, and especially Mrs. Edma Dumanian, for their continuous support to this Armenian Studies program at the University of Chicago, which allows us to have at least a couple of lectures to invite distinguished Armenian scholars, scholars in Armenian studies, to present their research in Armenian studies and share it with us. And of course, the Dumanian family, the endowment also allows us to have annually a visiting professor to teach one course, usually in the spring, and that also allows our students to take advantage of it, whatever is offered, which is related to their field of study in Ottoman studies, in Iranian studies, or any other Middle Eastern area fields of study, and even beyond that, like the music department and others. Today we are very lucky to have our current visiting professor, Ümit Kurt, to present his talk on a very interesting subject. So I'll just introduce him briefly. So Ümit Kurt is a historian of the modern Middle East. His research is on the social, cultural, and economic history of the Ottoman Empire and early Turkish Republic in the 19th and 20th centuries. After completing his dissertation at the Department of History at Clark University in 2016, he held postdoctoral positions at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University and the Polonsky Academy in the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. He also served as a visiting assistant professor in Armenian Studies program at California State University in Fresno, and as a vice executive secretary for the International Network of Genocide Scholars from 2020 to 2023. Currently, he is an assistant professor in the School of Humanities, Creative and Social Sciences, and an affiliate with the Center for Study of Violence in the University of Newcastle, Australia. His recent book, The Armenians of Aintab, The Economics of Genocide in an Ottoman Province, came out from Harvard Press, Harvard University Press in 2021, and that has been the recipient of the Dr. Sona Aronyan Book Prize for Excellence in Armenian Studies. Honorable mention book prize by Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association, and Prose Award finalist in the World History category by the Association of American Publishers in 2022. He is also the co-author of The Spirit of the Laws, The Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide, that was published in 2017, co-editor of Armenians and Kurds in the Late Ottoman Empire, coming out of the California State University Fresno Press in 2020, and the Committee of Union and Progress, Founders, Ideology and Structure, again from California State University Fresno Press in 2021. As well as The State of the Art of the Early Turkish Republic, again coming out of California State University Press in Fresno in 2023. Kurt is the winner of many awards and scholarship and fellowships worldwide. He's currently working on his third book, manuscript project on the global patterns of mass violence in the Ottoman borderlands in 1860s to 1920s. So without further ado, let's welcome today's our speaker, Professor Ümit Kurt.
Thank you so much for such a generous introduction, and I also want to express my gratitude to Dumanyan family and Professor Harutunyan and Holly Schisler for having me here as a Dumanyan visiting assistant professor. For a long time, I wrote about violence and its social dynamics, local dynamics especially, with an awareness of its embeddedness in a specific historical time and place. I try to show how these dynamics play an extremely important role in the disintegration of social relations and the breakdown of social fabric in the city of Aintab, where I was born and raised, the southeastern part of Anatolia. Persecution, forced deportation, and mass murder of Armenians. Accompanying the massacres, I also elucidate the confiscation and plunder process of Aintab Armenians. In doing so, I often encountered particular events, occurrences, and try to see a macro and sweeping picture through those incidents. It enables me to see contingencies and other possibilities and unintended consequences of the things I have been dealing with. So, having pondered how and why and under which circumstances violence occur in a particular place, examine motivations of its sundry actors, I decided to change my axis and this time hold the book from the opposite side and start to raise the following question. What made violence impossible or restrain it? Under what conditions it could be possible carried out? I try to understand and explain, despite the presence of propitious dynamics for violence to break out, how and why it can be restrained in some places and not possible to do so in other places. That's simple as it is for me. In this way, I believe we can have a better understanding of dynamics of violence and mass killings. So today, for that purpose, it begins, curiously enough, with a group sex in a bathhouse in Adapazarı. Refik Halit Karay, a famous Turkish novelist, was exiled after Turkey's War of Independence as one of the notorious 150s who was declared enemy collaborators. In 1920, he published a long story in his collection, Memleket Hikayeleri, Stories of the Country, titled Yatık Emine, about the events that befall a prostitute. Emine's story takes place after the counter-revolution of March 31st, 1909, a coup attempt to topple the government of Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, staged mainly by conservative religious circles, oppositional elements and reactionary forces who supported Abdülhamid II. It was a period when the Ottoman Empire's constitutional monarchy was in the midst of a serious crisis. This coup attempt was suppressed on 24th of April by the Action Army from Macedonia under the command of Mahmut Şevket Pasha. In the story, Emine lives in Ankara and makes her living as a prostitute. Due to some unfortunate incidents that occur in the city, the governor exiles her to a district 2 hours away. The local prefect warns the gendarme commander not to allow Emine to commit any immoral acts while she is there. The local residents have heard that Emine has settled in their town and feel a great unease. They send a committee to the local prefect to tell him that they do not want her here. But his response is unsurprising. He says that Emine has been sent to this town so she can be surveilled by the community. In this way, she will be constrained in her actions and forced to abandon her immoral life. Although she is helped by a few people, this assistance is spotty at best. The majority of the townsfolk do not want her there. Emine is not given enough opportunities to work or get by. She tries to carry on for a while, hungry, thirsty, and homeless, but eventually she gets sick and is left to die. The experiences the unfortunate heroine of Refik Halit Karay's story lives through are not simply one of or imaginary events from the last days of the empire. The veracity of the environment portrayed can be proven by existing historical data, however sparse. There are not enough life narratives or memoirs that allows us to know in detail things that happened to the migrating populations that were settled in the towns or cities of the remaining lands of the Ottoman Empire after it lost territory in the Balkans and other regions. However, the records from those cases that have been studied allows us to track details about both individual lives and the general social atmosphere of the period. From what can be gleaned in the records that shed light on such details, at roughly the same date, there was a similar case of a woman in the administrative district of Adapazarı in Izmit province. Karay not only fleshes out the life and tribulations of his heroine, but also provides us with a near-to-life portrayal of the period's social and political climate. With its proximity to the Ottoman capital, Istanbul, and advantages stemming from its easy access and agricultural potential, Adapazarı was one of the more prosperous regions of the empire. At the end of the 19th century, the administrative district of Adapazarı, connected to the Sancak of Izmit, had a population of around 18,000 that was made up of Muslims, Armenians, Greeks, Circassians, and the Jews. As the region continuously took in immigrants, its demographic balance changed rapidly in three main periods. The aftermath of the Crimean War, 1853-56, the Russo-Ottoman War that took place in the Balkans and the Caucasus, 1877-78, and the Balkan Wars in 1912-1913. During these periods, massive numbers of Muslims were forced to migrate. One of the places they settled was Izmit. In particular, Bosniak people who were forced to immigrate from Rumeli to Anatolia were settled in Izmit and other administrative districts connected to it, mainly Adapazarı. In this way, from 1856 onward, Bosnian migrants were brought to the district. By 1911, the Muslim population had become the main inhabitants of the area. This flow of migrants contributed in essential ways to Adapazarı's economic development. Being linked to the railroad line helped Adapazarı's economic growth. By the beginning of the 20th century, it had become an important economic entity. In this period, Muslims and non-Muslims lived relatively peacefully. Armenians and Greeks influenced the district economic, social, and cultural life, and the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions opened a station in Adapazarı in 1840. In the second half of the 19th century, educational efforts of the American missionaries in the region contributed greatly to the social and economic development of Armenians in particular. From the importance of Armenian tradesmen in the economic life of Adapazarı and the surrounding region, it's clear that Armenians, who were the most populous group of non-Muslims there, were heavily active in trade, agriculture, and various crafts. The rapid changes stemming from bureaucratic development, administrative modernization, and the migration in particularly undeniably increased tensions between the different elements of the Ottoman society. In analyzing these tensions, one must also take into account the swift increase in the Muslim population, their inability to adapt at the same speed to the changes occurred around them, and relatively few possibilities they had to secure a livelihood. One example of what desperate people will do to make a living occurred on February 25, 1911, and subsequently snowballed. This was a case of adultery between a Muslim woman and 5 Christian men. This event reveals the struggle to adapt faced by both Muslims and Christians caught between the traditional balances of Ottoman society and the radical transformation of conditions at the outset of the 20th century. 3 Armenian and 2 Greek men who resided in Adapazarı were caught having a group sex with a Bosniak Muslim woman in a bathhouse belonging to an Armenian. After being caught, they were brought into police custody. Later, the recently appointed local prefect of Adapazarı, Hüseyin Sırrı Bey, ruled that the perpetrators should remain in custody until they could be brought in front of a judge. In doing so, he tried to give the incident a political character. If these people were to be released, he asserted, then problems might break out between the Muslims and Christians of the district, just like what happened in Adana and its environs as the second in a series of large-scale massacres of Armenians that broke out on April 14 and 17 and 25th and 27th of 1909. The Adana events claimed more than 20,000 Armenian lives. Citing his fear of similar violence, Sırrı Bey applied to the district governor of Izmit for the public prosecutor to issue an order for the perpetrators to remain in custody while the investigation continued. However, the prosecutor's office decided that this event was simply an immoral act of adultery and therefore ordered the release of the 3 Armenian and 2 Greek men. On March 1st, 1911, roughly a week after the incident in the bathhouse, 28 people, 10 of them were headmen or neighborhood headmen, signed a joint petition and delivered it to the local prefect's office. That's the joint petition they signed. That is the local prefect's office, so they send it to Sırrı Bey. The document is useful for its details on how both the Muslim and non-Muslim communities interpreted this incident. According to the petition, a Bosnian migrant by the name of Hure, otherwise known as Zehra Hatun, lived in Çukur Ahmediye neighborhood of Adapazarı and had long been working as a prostitute. She had caused the physical and spiritual devastation of many young men. The Bosnian migrants in the district had been complaining the situation was unacceptable. They expressed their sensitivities by arguing, I'm quoting, "The reason we came here and abandoned our homeland in the Balkans was precisely because we could not consent to this sort of obscenity, this sort of fuhşiyat in Turkish," unquote. The petition writers had already spoken with the authorities several times to ensure that Hure and her pimp Ankaralı faced legal consequences so that this regrettable immorality did not continue. However, the necessary actions were not taken against these 2 individuals, and they continue openly engaging in prostitution. In the most recent case, according to the petition, Hure was caught having sex with several non-Muslims inside in the bathhouse of Armenian community. They were caught and placed in custody pending trial. These immoral activities harm the Muslim community, the petitioners argued. Therefore, they requested that Hure and her pimp Ankaralı be exiled to a distant place to show that the government would not permit such immoral acts. It would also be in the town's best interest to ensure that, quote, from the document, prostitutes like these, unquote, do not sour relations between the Muslim and Christian communities, unquote, who until this time had gotten along like brothers. Although the Muslim and non-Muslim communities agreed that the incident could be solved with the exiling of perpetrators, local prefect Sırrı Bey was not satisfied with this suggestion and took a different approach. He gave a man known as the Lieutenant Hayrullah Efendi the task of visiting the coffee houses frequented by the Muslim community. Hayrullah's task was to tell them that Christians rape a Muslim woman, thus giving rise to rumors that will turn this incident into something like that, like what happened between Christians and Muslims in Adana. On the local prefect's orders, the lieutenant tried to stir up the Muslim community by saying that not a single person had come to Sırrı Bey's office to complain about this affront against Islam, even though he had expected them to come and deliver a joint petition. This apathy had kept him awake for 2 nights straight. Despite this attempted provocation by Hayrullah Efendi, the Muslim regulars at the coffee houses told him they had complete faith in the judicial and administrative authorities to do whatever was necessary with the people involved in this incident. More importantly, they stressed that this affair was not something that will cause any conflict between the 2 communities. They told Lieutenant Hayrullah that they would be rejecting Sırrı Bey's request for them to write a petition. Despite this outright rejection he received from the Muslim community, Sırrı Bey prepared a general petition that reflected his view of the incident. This he signed in the name of local assembly member Hacı Mehmet Efendi. Then Hayrullah took this petition around from shop to shop to have local Muslims sign it before sending it to the provincial authorities. Realizing what was happening, the Muslims from the coffee houses Hayrullah had visited immediately sprung into action. Responding to Sırrı Bey's act of forgery, Many of Adapazarı's Muslim, Armenian, and Greek notables, doctors, local assembly members, headmen, Islamic preachers, religious figures, and Quran reciters even, plus a group of merchants, sent a complaint about Sırrı to the presidency of the Ottoman Assembly on March 7, 1911. In the document, they stated that the prefect's actions should be investigated for putting the constitutional monarchy, meşrutiyet, at risk, and requested that an inspector be sent to Adapazarı. The petition accused Sırrı Bey of slander and accusations that would put the peace and order of Muslim and the old Christians of Adapazarı at risk. The group went even further and said that Sırrı Bey was playing a dangerous game by single-handedly trying to create an occasion for events like what happened in Adana to come between Muslim and non-Muslim communities of Adapazarı. The same group also sent a telegraph of complaint to the Minister of Interior. There, they wrote that they were ready to prove that Sırrı was involved in other incidents that put the constitutional order in peril. On March 13, the authorities decided to send a fair and unbiased civil inspector. On March 18, they handed over the petition to Deputy Inspector Sami Bey so he could shed light on the situation and discover the truth. After the inspector arrived in Adapazarı, he began collecting testimony from the people that wrote the petition about Sırrı. Analysis of this event offers us an important example of why mass violence like what happened in Adana seemed likely yet did not occur in Adapazarı. Instead of exploring the origin, causes, and microdynamics of large-scale, usually state-directed violence against civilians, this talk probes into the microdynamics which make restraint possible. I also show that because the social dynamics and network of relations in different provinces, sanjaks, and districts of the empire varied, the potential for realizing the Ottoman ideal differed according to location. What this microhistorical research elucidates is that close to the imperial capital, in the critical period of 1911, on the eve of the Balkan Wars, the two dominant religious groups sought to live together peacefully under the banner of Ottomanism. Concomitantly, I revealed that the CUP, which had successfully organized a revolution for this ideal of coexistence in July of 1908, continued to resist the emergence of any vacuum in political authority in the provinces. The worst condition for peace between the different groups of empire and prosperity, security, and order in the country was the continuation and sustainability of the constitutional monarchy. It was this that Sırrı Bey threatened with his actions. It appears that Sırrı, an administrator representing the Ottoman government, used this prostitution case to distract from accusations against him and turn in public opinion. On the one side, there was a local prefect who saw relations between the two communities living together in fraternity and peace by creating an atmosphere of chaos and confusion. On the other side, there was a group of Muslims and non-Muslims trying to prevent this and preserve constitutional order. With the petition they submitted, they were not only filing a complaint against a state bureaucrat, putting the regime in danger, in demanding state intervention to protect the constitutional order, they were also exhibiting a certain kind of political participation and representation. They were involved in a serious form of civil disobedience against Sırrı's illegal and utterly arbitrary actions that far exceeded the authority given to him by the state. So what were the inspector questions? So to start with, an inspector sent from Istanbul to uncover whether the accusations of the petition signatories represented only their personal views or those of the entire community. In other words, he did seek to discover whether the discontent with the local prefect was just a feeling held by this group or whether it reflected the views of the overwhelming majority in the town. Another question the inspector asked was when exactly the Muslim prostitute engaged in improper relations with the Armenian and Greek men in the bathhouse and how the government first got word of this. Had this woman been previously engaged in prostitution? If so, had the community applied to the authorities before to stop her? If they had, to whom did they apply and what was the result? Another important question on the inspector's list is whether Sırrı appealed to the district governorship of Izmit because he reckoned that if the perpetrators were released, an incident between Muslims and Christians, like what happened in Adana, would occur. Or was it rather that if the judiciary and martial court did not look into this issue and the situation continued as it was, such an incident could break out anyway? With these questions, what the inspector sought to unveil was whether Sırrı had the intention of turning this commonplace event into something with a political character. The inspector also investigated the activities of Lieutenant Hayrullah Efendi, who acted under the orders of the local prefect. He asked if Hayrullah was sent there by Sırrı Bey, which coffee houses he visited to stir the Muslim community into action, and who was present. Another one of the critical issues requiring clarification was the content and preparation of the petition Sırrı Bey drew up using the name of local assembly member Hacı Mehmet Efendi, and which he told the Muslim community to sign. The inspector also researched whether the petition was indeed written by the prefect or by Hacı Mehmet Efendi under the former's urging. Had the incident of prostitution truly provoked the Muslim community? If so, was this due to the prefect's encouragement, or did the people become involved when they wrote their petition? Inspector questions were not limited to these. He also scrutinized what other activities Sırrı may have engaged in that would put the Ottoman constitutional order in danger. He stressed that these activities was come to light to explain his motivations and how he stood to benefit. Clearly, the inspector was thorough in his questions. He focused on uncovering details what would help explain the event from beginning to end and how Sırrı intervened in various stages. It would not be a stretch to argue that, far from being a standard investigation, it was motivated by a fear that things might get out of control due to Sırrı Bey's manipulation of the events. So the inspector began his interviews with the petitioners who complained about the prefect on March 28, 1911. At first they told him that they were aggrieved by the situation Sırrı Bey tried to create out of this simple case of prostitution. They filed their petition based only their initiative. They told the inspector that all they had heard was that a prostitute, 3 Armenians and 2 Greeks were removed from a bathhouse by a municipal police. They said that they did not know whether any illegitimate acts were performed. However, if they were unsure about how the government learned of this. In addition, Sırrı not only sent a telegraph to the district governor of Izmit that misrepresented the events, he also refused to take any illegal action against Hayrullah Efendi, even though the community told him Hayrullah was going around coffee houses trying to pressure the community to action. These and other issues pushed them to send a petition complaining about Sırrı Bey. The group also noted that prostitute known as Hure, Zehra Hatun, had engaged in prostitution in Adapazarı before. The neighborhood community had petitioned for her to be exiled to Düzce, but she came back to the town anyway. It's worth noting that requesting that the courts exile a woman known to be a prostitute was a practice that had continued for centuries. It was based on pre-modern customary law, mecelle, quote unquote. And in this period, in both cities and the countryside of the Ottoman Empire, it was a common occurrence for prostitutes to be sent out of an area and then return after a short while. What's interesting is that people were still recommending exile as a solution as late as 1911. In the case analyzed here, the central axis of the legal action suggested the political debates and the recommendations of various groups' influential leaders all intersect on one point: their perspective on women's bodies and the need for them to be controlled. The political tension in this period was completely focused on Hure's body. In the case files, there is not one sign of empathy for the difficult situation he found herself in. So the investigation continued without anyone deciding it might be necessary to listen to Hure or express any curiosity what about she might have to say. At this point, the investigation zeroed in on one essential question. When Sırrı Bey applied to the district governorship of Izmit to not release those involved, Did he do it because he wanted this situation to cause tension between Muslim and Christians, like what happened in Adana? In other words, Sırrı wished to give a political character to these events, or was everything that occurred simply what would have happened anywhere in the country in such case of a prostitution? The signatories of the petition had a clear answer to this question. They said that Sırrı sent a telegraph implying that if the perpetrators were left unpunished, the Muslims in the area would start mobilizing. Therefore, the whole thing could end with a regrettable incident. In this müessif bir olayla sonuçlanabilir her şey, he said. In this telegraph to the district governor of Izmit, Sırrı described the woman involved not as a Muslim prostitute, but a Muslim woman, which was a further sign of his vile intentions. Similarly, by saying an unfortunate incident, müessif olay, between Muslims and Christians could broke out in Adapazarı too, he was alluding to events in Adana. He knew that such an incident could only be started by the Muslims of the community, and again betrayed his ulterior motive by not specifying in the telegraph that the woman was a prostitute, even though he knew this. In addition, Sırrı Bey's man, Lieutenant Hayrullah, went to the coffee houses right after Friday prayers. He came across Hatip İsmail Efendi, Boşnak Hilmi, Karasu Naibi Yusuf, and others. He tried to induce them to provoke the Muslim community by saying to these esteemed men, quote, "Is there no Muslim blood in your veins? What are you sitting around for? They are screwing Muslim women, excuse my French, in Christian bathhouses. The prefect has not slept a wink at all night. He expects you to send a petition," unquote. When the man told Hayrullah that if this was the case, he should send a petition himself, he came to them on the prefect's orders. At this point, İsmail Efendi was called to the club of the Committee of Union and Progress, where some people had complaints about Sırrı. When the man at the club had asked Ismail what had happened at the coffee shop, he explained, and they began debating the issue. Given that Hayrullah had already a file in the inferior court for speaking against the constitutional regime, they decided to investigate the issue in all its dimensions. Their main goal was to understand whether the lieutenant tried to incite the community of his own accord or whether he was sent by Sırrı. According to the community, the case of prostitute, quote, would not under any circumstances stir up the community. Katiyen beynel anasır galeyan olmaz, unquote. Because of this, Sırrı wanted to distort the events. The signatories of the petition argued that even during the period of autocracy under Abdülhamit II, they got along with the Christians in the community and no negative incidents occurred. Knowing this, Sırrı tried to spread a rumor that would incite the Muslim community against the Christians, thereby preparing the ground for tensions to heighten. The signatories claimed that Sırrı aimed to secure his position. He wanted to cause an incident for the sake of his seat, they argued. Despite this nefarious attempt, relations between Adapazarı's Muslims and Christians were a source of contentment. Another of the inspector pressing question was whether, besides his handling of the prostitution incident, Sırrı had committed anything that would jeopardize the constitutional regime. In their petition, the group claimed that he and his tax collectors, saying they were collecting money for education, took money from the forest contractors, even though it was illegal for a civil servant to collect funds for anything not specified in the budget. He told the thief taxman he would, quote, cause problems for them if they did not bring in 5 or 10 liras each, unquote, and managed to collect 12 liras from them. The group said they paid up because they were scared of Sırrı's threats, but kept receipts to prove the money was taken. They stressed that such tax collection can only happen with an order from Istanbul or a ruling from the local council. However, nothing like this happened. No commission was created to oversee this money. Therefore, they claim that Sırrı acted poorly of his own accord. Quote, he takes as much as he wants and no one knows how the money is collected or spent, unquote. Sudi Efendi, one of the signatories of the petition, told the inspector that he was certain the Sırrı could not have been referring to anything but the massacres in Adana when he used the phrase, quote, the appearance of a regrettable incident between Muslims and Christians, unquote. The rest of the signatories believe the same. However, if Sırrı had not changed the phrase Muslim prostitute to a Muslim woman, they would have hesitated before linking this regrettable incident common to Adana. Sudi Efendi noted that this is why they sent the telegraph complaint to the Ottoman Assembly on March 1911. In March 1911. This simple case of prostitution took place at night and therefore could have been dealt with without the public noticing, especially if the government or Sırrı Bey had exiled the prostitute as was within his authority. Sudi Efendi said that this is what a patriotic governor would have done. Instead, Sırrı made something out of nothing. He acted against the constitution by arguing that a deplorable incident like what happened in Adana could break out in Adapazarı. In addition, although Sırrı mentioned a quote-unquote regrettable incident in his telegraph, he allowed the men who had illegitimate relations with the prostitute to strut to and from the court before they were freed without even being taken into custody, and therefore being allowed to re-enter the community without any incident. So Sudi Bey asked the inspector to question Sırrı Bey about exactly what kind of regrettable incident would be caused by the perpetrators being set free like this. Sudi Efendi and the other town notables noted that it was contrary to all logic and reason for the community to get worked up like this over a prostitute, they said. If prostitutes were reason enough to get worked up over, then, Sudi said, quote, not a single person would be left alive in all of Istanbul because of the prostitution going on in the quarter of Galata and Beyoğlu, unquote. In brief, there was no feeling of rage or agitation among the people of Adapazarı. However, Sırrı wanted there to be and acted accordingly. Sudi Efendi argued that Sırrı had not performed a single righteous act during his tenure as a state bureaucrat and said he would be willing to accept punishment if any such act could be proven. He proved his point by describing another minor incident. During the course of a forest reconnaissance, Sırrı refused to pass on a request to purchase the forest given to him by a villager named Mustafa to the local council. Sudi Efendi said he and his colleagues sought to understand his motivation and conducted their investigation. It turned out that a British national by the name of Gamble had come forward as a potential buyer, and when Sırrı requested 50 lira from him, Gamble consented. This is why the Mustafa's application was not transferred to the council. Sudi provided the inspector with documents related to this sale. So on March 13, 1911, the inspector finally interviewed Sırrı himself, so the central note in all of these events. Unfortunately, during my archival research, it was impossible to access Sırrı Bey's response to the inspector's questions. Perhaps another question that he should have asked was that Sırrı's response would have been whether those caught with the prostitute had been Muslims, or whether the prostitute herself had not been. Would Sırrı Bey have taken the same actions? It appears that Sırrı received no punishment from this investigation and continued to serve the government. For as far as the records show, on March 26, 1912, Mihalıççık prefect Cevdet Bey was assigned as the new prefect of Adapazarı, whereas Sırrı Bey was appointed the district governor of Amare. So he was promoted. So, what was this guy's motivation then? So as historians, the best answer we can give to this question will be a matter of finding the most likely motivation. Yet it's clear that he was distorting the facts when writing his petition about Zuhure, so it is not unlikely that he was trying to get the attention of the government or the CUP and thus further his career by playing a dangerous game. We understand both from the progression of events and the inspectors' interviews that both Muslims and the Christians of the community wanted to preserve political and social peace. They defended constitutional ideals, even going against Sırrı Bey to do so. To best of their ability, they tried to prevent the local prefect from destroying the prosperity of their town, just so he could cover up his own mistakes and illegal activities, like the issue with the forest or collecting money supposedly for education, as I have just explained. As the highest local authority, Sırrı played with the legal and social balances of the town, abusing the power with which he was invested. Meanwhile, he challenged anything represented a threat to his position, including the law itself. However, the law functioned as it was supposed to. Following the law against local prefects' agenda, the community did not allow him to manipulate them. In the end, the common sense and will to live together in the two communities was victorious. The people took a very clear stance and did not allow this harmony and balance to became a matter of debate. Sırrı tried to impose his conservatism and his moral ideals on society through the case of prostitution. However, when both communities refused to accept this and his bureaucratic authority was shaken, he chose to scare the community, heighten tensions by naming the Adana incident. Therefore, he tried to draw the attention of the central government to Adapazarı by bringing the events in Adana and its surroundings to the agenda. In this way, he attempted to manipulate both the public and the government. For the CUP government, Sırrı's actions were unacceptable. The government did not want to harm the constitutional monarchy and the ideal of Ottoman unity. Events like these could not be allowed to harm the survival of the regime and lead to massacres like those in Adana, especially in a town like Adapazarı. Whether or not such events were likely to happen, the government found it a cause for concern that the violence of Adana, which was still fresh in the collective memory of Muslim and non-Muslims alike, was made a topic of public debate. Especially after the events in Adana, any subsequent debate would only harm the government legitimacy and the political power, given that it was already facing hefty opposition both from within the parliament and without. Moreover, the government was aware that the outbreak of such violence in a place close to the center of the empire, and therefore to the attention of the West, would have negative political outcomes. One of the important reasons why there was no conflict between the communities in this critical period in Adapazarı, despite its religious and ethnic diversity, was that the rumors that Sırrı tried to spread using Lieutenant Hayrullah had no correspondence to reality in the eyes of both the Muslims and non-Muslims. Especially in mass violence incidents that take place on a local scale, the consistent spreading and sustaining of manipulative rumors is a useful and extremely important tool for the perpetrators, trying to create an atmosphere of fear and by increasing tension between the communities. For those who spread such rumors, it's redundant to verify their accuracy. As historian Max Berkholz has aptly underscored, it was not even necessary for an incident to occur for interpretations that could lead to intercommunal violence instantly emerge and rapidly spread. Rumors were often all it took a cause of major disturbance. The important thing is that they give the necessary fuel to communities already seeking any decision to use violence against other ethnic or religious groups. The atmosphere of collective violence and wild paranoia that civil and military bureaucratic elites and local gentry try to create at the local level constitutes both an ideological and functional ground for the possibility of violence. When we look at the events from this perspective, Sırrı had his reasons to create a climate of ethnic religious conflict in Adapazarı when he spread the false news that Christians had raped a Muslim woman. He did so for personal motivations and in contradiction to existing policies and alliances of the central government. However, as Donald Horowitz points out, gossip circulated during such situations must, first of all, have a target audience. In fact, as historian Tolga Esmer underlines, gossip is a form of information management and a valuable commodity to be accumulated and guarded, which may create or exacerbate conflict as easily as it contributes to group harmony. That said, Community members only wanted the removal of the prostitute Hure from their town and paid no creed to Hayrullah Efendi's rousing speeches made at the encouragement of Sırrı Bey. What are you waiting for? Christians are taking Muslim women to the bathhouses. Don't you have any Muslim blood? Or the infidels, yavurlar, take a Muslim woman and do so and such to her. Tomorrow they will even do this to our women, unquote. Based on the community's restraint, we can understand that they still believe in law and order in the Ottoman Empire. Moreover, the fact that those pressure to react follow up on this matter by applying to the proper authorities, after which the government promised to punish the responsible parties, shows that such rumors and gossip did not yet have a receptive audience among either Muslims or non-Muslims. There had always been harmony between the Muslim and Christians residing in Adapazarı, and this harmony couldn't be disrupted by an event that would have regarded as a common incident. However, they also warned Sırrı and his ilk that provocations aimed at disrupting this unity would not yield the desired results. They stated that the survival of the constitutional monarchy depended on unity and harmony, and stressed that everyone should work for this cause, especially the local prefect, who was an officer of the government. So why did Sırrı remark on such a path? His slander the local community members may have been due to his grudge, and it's possible to argue that this grudge emerged with Süleyman Forest issue. I'll explain this photo later. He was angered that his corruption was exposed by the complaints against him. Sırrı Bey caused great damage to the treasury with the forest issue. When it was revealed that others would benefit from this damage, he admitted that he had made a mistake. His main duty as a state officer should have been to endear the government to the local community, but because of his actions, the people of Adapazarı began to despise even regular civil servants. Sırrı Bey tried to alienate and separate the people from each other, intimidating the poor villagers with threats and fear. Hagop Daylaryan Efendi, one of the petition signatories, went further and stated that Sırrı acted like a dictator and treated people completely arbitrarily. Hagop Efendi also claimed that Sırrı even colluded with the other government officials to try to get the man he wanted to be appointed there. According to Sipahizade Hamit Bey and Diyarbakırlızade Ömer Efendi, two leading figures of Adapazarı, who complain about Sırrı alongside Hagop Daylaryan, social unrest was directly caused by his arbitrary actions. It was dangerous for him to attribute a motivation similar to the Adana incidents to the people of the town. To even suggest such a thing was risky. In a diverse town like Adapazarı, such a slight act of carelessness would not have caused violence like this to break out. Sipahizade Hamit Bey, who echoed the community's feelings, repeated that the primary duty of Sırrı was to stop anyone attempting to incite discord among the people by deliberately spreading gossip. Instead, he was meant to encourage the peoples to live together in peace. The extreme violence that targeted Armenians in Adana in April 1909, to which Sırrı Bey initially alluded with the phrase called emergence of a tragedy between Christians and Islam, unquote, brought about serious debates within the regime. The March 31st incident, and more importantly, the Adana massacres, dealt a serious blow to the 1908 Young Turk Revolution telos to gather all the social groups under an Ottoman identity, regardless of religion, ethnicity, and sect. In a sense, this was the first major test for the political regime that the CUP was seeking to establish. The actions and policies of Cemal Pasha, who was appointed as governor of Adana shortly after the massacres took place, aimed to promote brotherhood, unity, and solidarity among Muslim groups, including Caucasian immigrants, seasonal migrant workers, Kurds, Turks, and Circassians in Adana, and Armenians to re-establish the ideal of Ottomanism. During his tenure as governor of Adana, Cemal Pasha tried to eliminate the hatred that made it difficult for Muslim and Christian communities to live together in relative harmony, and which made religious and ethnic differences starker. The stability of the regime and security of the empire with its multi-confessional society were of critical importance for the CUP. It was therefore essential to prevent events that would disrupt this. According to Cemal Pasha, quote, "Separation is weakness and the unity is strength. The purpose of the Young Turks is to create and promote unity. The only pillar that will bring these conflicts, divisions to peace and to unite them is Ottoman nationality. We should no longer look at people as Turks, Kurds, Armenians, or Greeks. They should all be Ottomans and treated as such," unquote. However, these efforts of the Istanbul branch of CUP and Cemal Pasha were in vain because a crisis of trust had already emerged between the two communities that were difficult to repair in Adana. This is what most harmed the ideal of unity. An exhausted Cemal Pasha uttered the following words shortly before he left the post of Adana governor at the beginning of 1911. "That's enough Adana for me. I came here with courage and good intentions to develop the region and improve the condition of people. But I saw only disappointment and disapproval. This is a remnant of the past. Abdulhamid poisoned the hearts and feelings of the Muslim population. These people see nothing but self-interest in everything I do. They curse me and blame me for all the problems that exist," unquote. Despite all his efforts, Cemal Pasha could not keep the sincerity and trust between the Muslim and non-Muslims from falling apart. It was shortly before he left Adana that prostitution incident took place in Adapazarı. There, Sırrı's attempt to marginalize the two communities by referring to hostility in Adana, however, it did not produce similar results. The events that took place in Adana in the pre-1913 political environment were an exception for the CUP government. The government did not want such an event to happen or for either Muslim or non-Muslim citizens to experience such terror again. Sırrı tried to give the impression that he successfully prevent events in Adapazarı like those that happened in Adana. He played on the fears and delusions for the sake of his bureaucratic career. Sırrı claimed that contrary to allegations against him, he brought up the events in Adana to protect the constitutional monarchy and to draw the attention of the central government to the situation in Adapazarı. He was a bureaucrat who intimidated and manipulated everyone, including the people of Adapazarı and the CUP government. The Muslim community, led by the Bosnians and the non-Muslim communities of Greeks, Armenians, and Jews, tried to preserve the constitutional regime and the ideal of unity at the regime center, despite having a local prefect from the CUP. He was a member of the CUP, by the way, Sırrı Bey himself. And they did this just before the two important wars, the Tripolitanian War and the Balkan Wars, that deeply affected the political fate of the empire and the CUP. Their actions reveal a strong political awareness. It's also clear that the so-called regrettable events in Adana were a significant political touchstone in the memory of both Adapazarı communities. For example, Hagop Daylaryan Efendi again stated that when Sırrı sent telegraphs saying things like the two communities are going to attack each other, Christians rape a Muslim woman, he said, Sırrı acted just like Asaf Bey, the district governor of Cebeli Bereket in Adana province, who was accused of organizing the massacre of Armenians in the region by provoking the local Muslims. However, when at a similarly critical juncture, the people of Adapazarı choose to protect the constitutional regime and collectively oppose Sırrı Bey's separatist actions within their strong political consciousness. The main point here is the political will of the Muslim and non-Muslim communities in Adapazarı, who were committed to the ideal of living together. Therefore, unlike Adana in February and March of 1911, the ideal of unity had a social counterpart in places like Adapazarı. As a result, in such a critical period in the life of both communities, restraint prevailed when it came to preventing any potential violence. The concept of coexistence was a common ground for people. The members of the respective communities did not allow society to be split up along artificial ethno-religious lines as Muslims on the one hand, and Christians and Jews on the other. Therefore, while these communities did work to define themselves and their political rights, demands and representations and problems, they did not articulate this through their ethnic and religious identities. In this way, they prevented the sectarian conflict that the Sırrı desired. The attitude of local community was a deciding factor in this case. Long-established neighborly relations created strong ties between the two communities. Such specific social and political dynamics, especially face-to-face interactions in the economic and commercial fields, indicate the existence of a shared space for social and political interaction and social capital that prevented violence from breaking out locally. In a nutshell, the incident in Adapazarı once again shows us how vital individual interventions, initiatives, and decisions are in social events and explosions. The documents allows us to trace complaints about Sırrı's arbitrary attempt to start violence in a critical political environment based on a female body. We can say that gossip and provocations, drawing on the concept of quote-unquote honor, are effective in such environments. However, the real protagonist of this event, Zehra Hatun, described as the prostitute Hure, was ignored as an individual throughout the entire story. Whether or not she was a person of honor and chastity was defined entirely through her body. The reasons why she made a living through sex worker, were not considered as she was considered responsible for people selling their properties and leaving the area. Because she destroyed morals and bodies of young people. Hure was seen as a disgrace to the honor of Islamic nation for Muslim and even Christian people. As the prostitute Hure, she had no rights and was allowed no quarter. Among the many piles of documents, her real name Zehra is mentioned only once. Thank you for your patience. This picture was taken in 1951 because Sırrı was in prison for 9 years, from 1939 to or 41 to 1951, 10 years. So he was in prison in Istanbul, in Sultanahmet, and once he was set free, he was kissing the stones on the ground because celebrating his liberty. This figure, it's so compelling because he joined the nationalist forces in Ankara in 1920s, the Kemalist national forces, and then he became an MP after the foundation of Republic. He was a position par excellence in the parliament, and he was an overarching enemy of İsmet İnönü. And Mustafa Kemal actually kept him in the parliament all the time because he needed that kind of tough guy in the parliament pushing, prime ministers and etc. He was vociferous, critical of İnönü's performance in Lausanne, especially. He accused of him, succumbing Cyprus, succumbing Mosul, and etc. He took the seat in the parliament 456 times. Okay, when Mustafa Kemal passed away, İsmet İnönü became the president. So he just kicked him from the parliament, and he started his opposition against to İnönü by sending surreptitious letters to influential people, and İnönü was following him, and he was caught while sending a letter in the post office in Istanbul, and he was put in prison. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I guess I had a question about your representation of Sırrı Bey's motivations. So it seemed like you were suggesting he had, purely personal motivations for making these accusations, and I was curious, especially given what you just said, given that he's a bureaucrat as well, what do we know about his intellectual kind of worldview, and how can we say that he's not motivated by, early strains of Turkism or other?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. It's a great question. So this guy, I can answer, right? So, or are we collecting? Okay. Thank you. It's a great question. Theo, right? Yes. So this guy, he was a graduate from the Imperial Political Science Department. He was a Mülkiye graduate. He was an very active in opposition to Abdülhamit II in the CUP seats. So he wasn't able to finish the Mülkiye because he was caught in a protest movement against Abdülhamit II in Beşiktaş in 1896, and he was sent exiled in Kastamonu. He was there. So he was a member of the CUP. He had all these CUP's ideals, but when I say CUP, I'm talking about the CUP from 1889 through 1902. He was not in Paris, he was not in Geneva when the CUP was turning itself into a political organization and so. But what we gleaned from his life story, his biography, he was close to the nationalist conservative wing of the CUP, I would say. Yes, he was an ethnic Turkish nationalist, that's for sure. But when you look at his activities in 1920 and 1921, he was defending liberalism in economic liberalism. That's why he was, overarching, a dissident to İsmet İnönü, because İsmet İnönü was defending their, state control of economy and so forth. He was very active in İzmir İktisat Kongresi, Izmir Economic Congress, with his liberal economic standpoint. And he was the first Minister of Finance of the first Turkish Ankara government in 1920 and 1921 again. And he joined the Nationalist Forces, and he was the founding members of the Felahi Vatan Grubu. Felahi Vatan, it was before the organization of the Rights and Defense of Anatolia and Thrace. So it was one of the resistant organizations formally organized in Ankara. In terms of, I would say he was liberal, but not in the political sense of the word. But in the economic field, he was defending economic liberalism, and he was against the Kadro movement in 1930s. He was anti-communist, and etc. His intellectual motive, I would only say, regarding this particular incident, I think his conservatism and his moral ideas which he tried to impose upon this people, the notables and Muslim community as well in the city. He was offered to be an MP in the Democrat Party seats right after he was set free. He was acquitted from the prison. He didn't accept it, for instance. Yeah.
My question would be, I was curious about what you said about Cemal Pasha.
Mm-hmm.
What I know about him, he was one of the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide in 1915. But what you are saying in 1909,
Yes.
after Adana events, he was pro-peace,
Yes.
and, reconciliation between the Armenians and the Muslims. So what can you talk about that? How did that kind of a 180 degrees turn happen with him?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Cemal Pasha, I think you know better than I do because you are more familiar with the Armenian sources and memoirs and the memoirs of Vera Brogner, genocide survivors. Cemal, of course, he was a very influential figure of the CHP Tramra. He was the governor of Syria during the war, and also the whole Greater Syria and Bilad al-Sham region was under his jurisdiction, and so forth. But he had different connections and relations with the Armenian community, especially in Cilicia region, because of his governorship in Adana. And also Cemal's attitude towards Jews and Arabs in the Greater Syria was entirely different from his, relations with the Armenians. So he was, I would say, so-called lenient towards the Armenians. And this is also mentioned by Armenians themselves. So because in 1909, when he was the governor of Adana, he had intimate relations with especially the religious leaders and the scholars, or the priests and the archbishops of the Armenian community in Cilicia. And interestingly enough, at that time, CUP did not want to lose Armenian Revolutionary Federation and their political support in the Ottoman Parliament. And also this collaboration did really matter for them. And Adana was a serious blow to that. So Cemal was aware of that, and they even declared that, we will find who were the culprits and we will punish them. So they gave this promise to Armenian Revolutionary Federation, but Armenian Revolutionary Federation was not content with that. They asked the CUP to publish an official declaration stating that we still fulfill the reforms demanded by the Armenians. So they intentionally sent Cemal to this region because Cemal at that time was more open to communication with this community. Even he met, Patriarch Sahak of Sis back then. So these relations, after 6 years, when he was appointed as a district governor of Syria, the Armenian Patriarch Sahak always got in touch with him, asking his help to help the deportees, and also and Cemal responded to that these things, because I'm not trying to whitewash Cemal here. Cemal was in favor of deportation, and Cemal also saw the Armenian question as a security matter of the state, and he believed that the Armenian political leaders betrayed the nation, and so he was on the same page with Talat and Enver. He was the one who convinced them to deport Armenians from Konya to Syria, actually. But Cemal was not in favor of, this is my analysis, mass killings, massacres. He did not want that. And he did not let that happen in his area of jurisdiction in Syria, for instance. Derzor was not under his jurisdiction, for instance. But he did not openly become opposed to Talat's orders. He always, fulfilled Talat's order. He never challenged him openly. But he had a different kind of strategy to deal with the Armenian question, to resolve this issue. How? By assimilating them. Converting them to Islam, also persuading them to get converted to Islam, because he believed that he could capitalize on Armenian labor, Armenian know-how, and in Syria especially. He also believed in law and order in Syria, and he wanted to prosper the region, and he made use of Armenian labor. Imagine him like a colonial governor in Syria. He was like a British colonial governor in India, something like that. So he had this kind of, because I think we should make this differentiation between the leaders, the actions of Cemal, those of Talat, and those of Cemal. They were, of course, coming from the same genocidal universe, that's for sure, but their approach with regards to resolving the Armenian question was different from each other. Cemal was not in favor of physical annihilation, I would say. And when you look at the memoirs of Armenian genocide survivors, especially from the Gilicia region, southeastern part of Anatolia, and many Armenians gave Cemal credit and expressed their gratitude to him because they said they were saved by Cemal. But that does not, of course, justify or whitewash Cemal as a perpetrator. Unlikely. He had different kind of strategy for the Armenians. He also, for instance, he improved the conditions of deportees in the concentration camps in Hama, Humus, Salamia, but he also opened up orphans. He put all these kids to orphanages, and he forced them to speak Turkish and convert them to Islam as well. Assimilation is another defining feature of the notion of genocide as well. So.
What was he doing, the Kaymakam Sırrı Bey, during the 1915 incidents? Did we talk about that?
1915?
1915, yeah.
Yeah, he passed away in 1953.
1915.
1915,
yeah.
Pardon. 1915, not 1950. In 1915, Sırrı was still district governor of Amare. He had nothing to do with deportation. He was away from the, he did not deport any Armenian, for instance. He was already in Amare, so deportations were happening already. And So we didn't have much information about his activities during the war, actually, in the archives. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you.